Have you ever paused, for no reason at all, just stood still, heart quietly racing, as if something unseen was urging you to wait? Imagine this. A man walks toward his truck like he's done 100 times before. Same keys, same road, same quiet morning. But today, something feels different. The air is heavier, time seems slower, and deep inside, a quiet voice rises, not from fear, but from somewhere sacred. He doesn't know it yet, but what he's feeling is real, a true angel sign before tragedy. A soft warning, gentle, invisible, and just in time. What you're about to hear is not fiction. It's the kind of story that leaves you wondering how close we all walk to the edge, and how sometimes we are pulled back by something we can't explain. It might come as a dream, a sudden hesitation, or a strange feeling that makes no sense. Until later. Until the moment you realize something was watching over you. Is it coincidence? Or a divine hand? This is a story of mystery and hope, of a man and a sign that may have saved his life. Before the worst happens, sometimes the universe sends a sign. If you believe in guardian angels, fate, or simply want to hear real stories of life-changing moments, subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us for today's powerful story. It began before the sun. Daniel Hartman stirred in the dark long before the alarm clock called his name. His bedroom was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels thick, like the air is holding its breath. A soft breeze moved through the open window, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something he couldn't name, but that reminded him of standing in a church as a child, that strange, still reverence before the choir sang. He sat up slowly. There was no pain, but a weight in his chest, not heavy like fear, not sharp like panic, just present, as if something or someone was sitting just behind his ribs, waiting, watching. He pressed his hand over his heart, half expecting it to ease. It didn't. "It's nothing," he told himself, his voice a whisper in the dim room. "Just a dream I don't remember. Maybe too much coffee yesterday." But the feeling didn't fade. By the time Daniel loaded the truck, the sky had begun to shift, burnt orange melting into soft gray. The morning was calm, but he couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. Not bad exactly, just wrong. Like the air around him knew something he didn't. He ran his delivery route every Thursday. Same start, same end. Jasper County was 2 hours out, and he knew every mile by memory. But when he pulled out the map to double-check a bridge closure from last week, his eyes kept drifting toward another road. An older one, narrow, winding, mostly forgotten. He hadn't taken it in nearly a decade. It didn't make sense. The alternate road would add time, close to an hour. There was no traffic warning, no reason to avoid the usual route. And yet, the pressure in his chest stirred again. He stared at the dotted line on the map, feeling his breath catch slightly as a quiet thought echoed in his mind. Take the other road. He blinked. Why would I do that? He muttered aloud. There was no answer. Only that same subtle weight pressing inward, gentle but firm, like a hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He turned on the radio to clear his head. Static, then silence. He flipped stations. Nothing but a low hum, as if even the airwaves were holding something back. He tried to focus. He had a schedule, deliveries to make, but each time he reached for the ignition, something held him still. The truck felt colder than usual. The steering wheel seemed unfamiliar in his hands. Daniel wasn't a man given to drama. He didn't believe in omens or visions, but something about that morning felt sacred, untouched, the kind of moment that splits your day in two, before it and after it. With a slow exhale, he folded the map and took the other road. The trees were thicker along that route, and the pavement cracked with age. Dust rose behind him like a trail of ghosts. The farther he drove, the quieter everything became. No birds, no other cars, just the hum of his old truck and the strange sensation that someone, or something, was riding with him. About 20 minutes in, a deer crossed the road. He braked gently, watching it vanish into the woods. Then a strange thing happened. Just for a moment, as the deer turned its head, Daniel swore he saw something in its eyes. Not fear, not instinct, but awareness, as if it knew. The pressure in his chest loosened, not completely, but enough for him to breathe again. He arrived in Jasper County nearly an hour later than usual. The delay meant nothing to the client, just a handshake and a nod. But back in town, as he pulled into a gas station for a coffee refill, a cluster of people were gathered around a small radio inside the store. Their faces were pale. One man clutched a newspaper against his chest. "Did you hear?" someone asked. "That pileup on Highway 57 just after 8 this morning." Daniel froze. Highway 57 was his usual route, 7 cars involved. One semi had jackknifed on the slick curve by the river. Time of the crash? 8:06 a.m. He looked down at the receipt in his hand. The timestamp read 8:07 a.m., marking the moment he was still alive, rolling slowly along a dusty back road surrounded by silence and pine. He didn't speak. He just stood there, holding his coffee, listening to the words pass around him like wind through trees. He thought about the pressure in his chest, the whisper in his mind, the deer's eyes. None of it made sense, and yet all of it did. Was it just luck? A change of heart? Or something divine? Daniel never got his answer. But from that day on, he kept a small cross hanging from the rearview mirror of his truck. Not because he was suddenly religious, but because something had spoken to him, and he had listened, and that had made all the difference. That night, the air in Daniel's house felt heavier than usual. The walls seemed quieter, the clock louder. Even the warmth of the old floorboards beneath his feet seemed distant, like the comfort of routine had thinned somehow. He tried to shake it off. The day had been strange. He knew that much. But now, with his deliveries done and his boots kicked off by the door, all he wanted was stillness. He sat on the couch, TV murmuring in the background, the flicker of the screen casting pale shadows across the room. His body was tired, but his mind wouldn't rest. The pressure he'd felt in the morning was gone, yet something else lingered, something unspoken. Eventually, sleep found him, quiet and unnoticed. And that's when the dream came. In it, Daniel was driving. The road looked familiar, his usual Thursday route, but everything was covered in thick fog, so dense it swallowed the edges of the world. His headlights barely pierced the grey, and even the sound of the engine was muffled, like he was moving through water. Then, a light. Not from his truck, not from the sky. It appeared in the middle of the road, brilliant but soft, not blinding, not harsh. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat made of stars, and within the light, a figure. Human-shaped, but not entirely human. It didn't walk or move. It simply was. It radiated warmth, not heat, but peace, the kind that wraps around your soul, not your skin. The figure raised one hand slowly. No sound came, no words were spoken, but somehow Daniel heard it, deeply, like a thought. That wasn't his own. Turn away! The voice wasn't male or female. It wasn't loud, but it carried truth. Heavy, sacred, undeniable. And then, darkness. The dream ended not with fear, but with emptiness, like something had been shown and then taken back. Daniel jolted awake, breath caught in his throat, heart pounding like it was running from something. The TV buzzed with static. The clock read 3:17 a.m. He sat there in the silence, hands gripping the blanket, sweat on his brow despite the cool night. For a long time, he didn't move. The dream had felt too real. The fog, the light, the voice, it still clung to him like a scent he couldn't name. "Just a dream," he whispered. But even as he said it, something inside him stirred. A quiet knowing. The same way you know when someone's looking at you before you turn around. The same way a child knows when they're safe, even in the dark. This wasn't just imagination. It wasn't stress. It wasn't random. It was a message, a sign. And though Daniel didn't fully understand it yet, part of him had already decided, next time he saw a light in the fog, he'd listen. Morning came with a restless kind of stillness. The sky was a soft silver, heavy with low clouds that seemed unsure whether to rain or retreat. Daniel moved through his routine like muscle memory. Coffee, thermos, clipboard, keys. But the dream still whispered at the edges of his mind. He didn't tell anyone. Not his neighbor who waved as he pulled out. Not the store clerk who loaded the last crate into the back of the truck. Some things are too fragile to explain. By 7:43 a.m., he was on the road again. Same route, same destination, same silence filling the cab. He flipped on the radio, expecting the usual local station. Country songs, a bit of weather, maybe news of last night's football scores, but what came through was static. Then a soft hum, and then something else entirely. A voice, female, calm, gentle, but with a strange weight behind it, like someone reading from a page not meant for the world. "Sometimes," the voice said, "the road you always take is not the road you're meant to walk today. Trust the nudge." Daniel's hands went still on the wheel. The cab felt colder somehow. The sound of the engine fading into the background. The voice didn't come again, just silence. Then the crackle of static. Then nothing. He hadn't changed the station. He hadn't even touched the dial. The words echoed inside him like a bell struck once in a deep canyon. Trust. The nudge. He came to a stop sign a few miles out. The truck idled, ticking softly, waiting for his decision. Straight ahead was the usual way, fast, clean, familiar, but to his left, the old road, the one from yesterday, the one from the dream. His knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. He could laugh it off, call it coincidence, say it was just some strange overlap from a nearby signal tower. But something inside him, that same quiet presence, rose again. The same one from the chest. Pressure. From the dream, from the fog. And this time, he listened. With a deep breath and no real reason, Daniel turned the wheel and guided the truck left, onto the old road, the one he had abandoned years ago. Gravel crunched beneath the tires like bones waking from sleep. The trees leaned in close, like they remembered him. He didn't know what he was looking for, or what had just happened, but for the first time in days, the tension in his chest loosened, not gone, but eased. Something was guiding him, and he had chosen to follow. The old road wound like a ribbon through dense trees, their branches arching overhead in a cathedral of green and gold. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in soft, scattered beams, but the light felt different here, gentler, as if the day itself had lowered its voice. Daniel drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound. No birdsong, no wind, not even the rustling of leaves. The air had a weight to it, not heavy, but still, like the forest was, holding its breath. And then something shifted. It was subtle at first, a coolness that crept through the cab, brushing the back of his neck. He passed the old wooden bridge, the one he barely remembered until now. Its beams faded to a soft grey. And just as the truck crested the next hill, he saw it, a figure on the roadside. At first, he thought it might be someone needing help, a traveler, a hiker maybe. But there was no car, no backpack, no motion, just a presence. As he approached, the shape grew clearer. A woman, tall and still, standing alone on the gravel shoulder. Her garments were pale, flowing gently, though the air around her was perfectly still. Her hair shimmered like silver in the sun, though it was hard to say what color it truly was. She didn't move, didn't flinch, only watched. And then her eyes met his, just for a second, but it was enough. Daniel felt something inside him still, like a string pulled taut suddenly released. The world slowed, even the sound of his own breath seemed to pause. It wasn't fear, it wasn't confusion, it was recognition. Not of her face, but of the moment itself, as if some deep part of him had always known he would see her here at this exact bend in the road. Then, slowly, she raised her hand, not to wave, not to ask for help, but to point, upward and outward, toward the distant line of mountains that framed the sky. Daniel turned his head instinctively, following her gesture. There was nothing unusual, just the peaks, washed in, morning light. When he turned back, she was gone. No footsteps, no sound, no trace of her presence. Just the empty shoulder of the road and the soft rustle of leaves finally moving again. He stopped the truck and got out, heart pounding with a quiet urgency. He scanned the trees, the road, the bridge behind him. Nothing, no figure, no tracks. And yet the feeling remained, so vivid it nearly overwhelmed him. He wasn't alone. He hadn't been. As he stood there, engine ticking behind him, Daniel felt something shift deep within, a quiet understanding too big for words. He didn't know who she was, or what she was, but he knew she hadn't been human, not in the way we understand it, not lost, not wandering. She had been there, for him, a sign, a guide, an angel maybe, and she was gone, just like that. But her presence lingered, and Daniel, for the first time in his life, looked toward the mountains, not with a traveler's eye, but with something closer to faith. Daniel drove in silence, his thoughts tangled in the image of the woman by the road, the way she hadn't moved, the way her eyes had stopped time. But more than anything, it was the pointing that haunted him, toward the mountains, toward something unseen. Then, without thinking, he slowed. No clear reason, no danger, just a sudden, irresistible pull in his chest, like someone whispering his name without sound. He eased the truck onto the gravel shoulder, dust rising around the tires. The forest around him stirred for the first time all morning, leaves fluttering like pages of an open book. He stepped out. The air hit him cooler than expected. Not cold, clean, almost sacred. His hands were shaking as he leaned against the hood, eyes scanning the woods, searching for any glimpse of the woman again. A glint of fabric, a flash of movement, anything. But there was nothing. Only trees, only wind, only the deep, patient silence of the mountains watching him from a distance. A breeze rolled in suddenly, brushing through the leaves, making them whisper like voices just out of reach, not harsh, not wild, gentle, like something ancient had stirred and then settled again. Daniel opened the passenger door, reaching for his glove box, needing something to ground him. A bottle of water, maybe. Something real. But when he pulled it open, his breath caught. There, sitting on top of a faded map, was a small postcard. He stared at it. It was old, creased at the corners, the edges worn with time. A picture of a modest white church printed on the front, the kind with a tin roof and a simple wooden cross. He knew that church. He'd helped repair its roof 10 years ago during a short mission trip in Alabama. He hadn't thought about it in ages. His fingers trembled as he flipped it over, and that's when he saw the writing. Small, careful, ink slightly smudged. "You are not alone. Listen." Daniel felt a chill run up his spine. It wasn't his handwriting. He would have remembered writing something like that. He hadn't seen this postcard in years, if ever. And yet, here it was, tucked inside his truck like it had been waiting. He sat back in the driver's seat, postcard resting on his lap, eyes fixed on the distant mountains the woman had pointed to. The moment felt heavy with meaning, but light with peace, like standing at the edge of something bigger than you'll ever understand. but somehow knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just breathed. And in that quiet, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not confusion, but presence. Not alone, not abandoned. Something, someone, had been with him this whole time. And now, for the first time, he was ready to listen. The rest of the drive passed like a half-remembered prayer, quiet, slow, and marked by pauses where Daniel found himself staring too long at the sky, or the trees, or his own reflection in the side mirror. The postcard still rested in the passenger seat beside him, like a silent companion. Every now and then he glanced at it, rereading the words, "You are not alone. Listen." By the time he reached the Jasper delivery station, the sun was leaning west, casting long shadows across the gravel lot. He was nearly an hour late. As he backed the truck into place and cut the engine, the station door burst open. It was Frank, the dispatcher. Usually calm, almost too calm. But today, his hands were shaking and his face had gone pale beneath the brim of his cap. "You took the back road?" Frank asked, eyes wide, like he wasn't sure he was seeing Daniel at all. Daniel nodded, stepping down from the truck. "Yeah, I just felt like I needed to." Frank didn't speak for a moment. He just stared at him. Then, "You didn't hear, did you?" Daniel's chest tightened. "Hear what?" "There was a landslide this morning, Highway 37. Daniel blinked. "That's..." he started, but Frank was already nodding. "Right where you would have been. Same stretch you always take. It happened not long after 8. He looked off into the distance, as if the words were hard to say. 2 cars went over the edge. The whole side of the hill gave out. They're still pulling wreckage from the trees." Daniel couldn't move, couldn't speak. He just stood there, the wind picking up around them, carrying dust and dry leaves across the parking lot like time itself was sweeping the moment clean. 8:10 a.m. That's when it happened. That was his time, his stretch of road, his routine. And he hadn't been there. He was on the old road, watching the sunlight catch in the trees, still trembling from a vision he hadn't been able to explain. The woman, the radio, the dream, the postcard in his glove box. They hadn't been coincidences. They had been pieces, threads in something bigger, something watching, something warning. Daniel sat back down in the cab of his truck, the door closing with a soft thud that seemed to echo too loud in his ears. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with something invisible but felt, like a presence resting just behind the veil of the world. He gripped the wheel with both hands and lowered his head. He didn't need answers, not now, because somewhere deep in his soul, Daniel knew the truth. He had been saved, not by chance, but by a sign. That evening the world felt softer. Daniel didn't speak on the drive home. He didn't reach for the radio. The hum of the engine was his only company, and even that faded beneath the quiet ache in his chest. Not a pain, something else, a release, the kind that comes when you realize just how close you came to the edge, and how someone, somehow, pulled you back. The sky above him darkened into velvet, scattered with stars that blinked like watchful eyes. The old truck rumbled into his driveway, headlights casting long beams across the front porch before flickering off. But Daniel didn't move. He stayed there, hands resting lightly on the wheel, breath shallow, eyes wide and far away. Then, without warning, the tears came, soft at first, then heavier. He wept, not from fear, not from shock, but from something deeper. Gratitude so vast it couldn't stay inside him. Gratitude for the dream. Gratitude for the voice on the radio. Gratitude for the woman on the roadside who had pointed toward life instead of death. He thought of how easily he could have dismissed it all. How simple it would have been to brush off the feeling in his chest, to ignore the dream, to laugh at the postcard in the glove box. But he hadn't. Something inside him, something quiet and sacred, had chosen to listen, and that choice had saved his life. He tilted his head back and looked at the stars. They blinked above the silhouette of the mountains, the very ones she had pointed to. And in that silence, in the cool breath of night, Daniel felt something wrap around him. Not a touch, not a voice, but presence, holy, real, undeniable. He whispered almost without realizing, "Thank you." He didn't know who he was speaking to. Maybe it didn't matter. A guardian angel? A divine force? A voice from a place beyond names? All he knew was this: something had seen him, something had warned him, and now he was alive to witness the stars. The tears kept falling, quietly, reverently, as Daniel sat in the stillness, humbled by a truth too vast to explain. He had been protected, not by chance, not by luck, but by something greater. Something inside Daniel changed after that week, not loudly, not suddenly, but in quiet ways that only someone truly paying attention would notice. He began waking before sunrise, not out of obligation, but because something in the stillness called to him. He'd make a cup of coffee and sit outside, wrapped in a worn jacket, letting the early air settle into his lungs. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full, full of presence, full of meaning. He stopped rushing. He listened more, to the wind moving through the trees, to the distant sound of birds returning at dawn, to the subtle shifts in his own heartbeat. He began to trust the things that couldn't be explained, the sudden pause before a turn, the feeling of warmth when no one else was around, the moments when time seemed to slow just before something important revealed itself. He started going to church again, not every Sunday, not with fanfare. He'd sit in the back, quiet, humble, not searching for answers, just being present, drawn by something he couldn't name, a longing to stay near whatever had reached out to him that morning. On the road, he began writing, not for anyone else, just in a small journal he kept by the bed. Dreams, impressions, moments of stillness, a hawk circling above the truck, a child's laughter in a grocery aisle, a cold breeze brushing his arm when no windows were open. Things he might have once ignored now seemed charged with quiet messages. He paid attention to the invisible threads, the signs between signs. And his daughter noticed. She came home from college one weekend, hugged him a little, longer than usual, and sat beside him on the porch as the sky turned gold. "You're different, Dad," she said, not with worry, but wonder. Daniel smiled, eyes on the fading horizon. "I guess I finally started listening," he said. And he meant it, not just to voices or dreams or angel signs before tragedy, but to life itself, to the divine rhythm behind the noise of the world, to the soft, sacred hum that had always been there, waiting for him to hear it. Years passed. The world changed around Daniel, as it always does. The roads were repaved, the news moved on, and even the trees lining the old route seemed to grow taller, older somehow. But the memory never faded. It didn't age. It stayed with him, quiet and vivid, like a page in his life forever marked. He never tried to make sense of it in any loud or grand way. He wasn't the kind to stand on a stage or call it a miracle. But when someone asked, when the moment felt right, he would share the story. Not to convince, not to preach, just to remind. He'd sit back, hands folded, eyes distant but soft, and in his voice there was always a gentleness, a kind of reverence for something he still didn't fully understand. "I don't know what it was," he'd say, "but something told me to turn, and because I listened, I'm still here." He never forgot the dream, the voice that spoke without words. He never forgot the light on the road, or the woman who looked at him like she already knew the ending. He never forgot the postcard in the glove box, waiting in silence until he was ready to see it. And most of all, he never forgot the feeling. That stillness, that invisible weight that pressed gently against his chest, not to frighten, but to guide. It wasn't about the landslide. It wasn't even about the road. It was about the moment, the exact sacred moment, when something beyond this world reached out, and he listened. That's the part that changed him, not the event, the listening. Because sometimes the most important choice we'll ever make is whether or not to trust that voice deep within us, the one that whispers without sound, the one that pauses our step, the one that nudges us ever so slightly towards something we can't yet see, but somehow already feel. We call them many things: instinct, fate, coincidence, but sometimes they're signs, and sometimes they save us. Daniel's life went on. He kept driving, he kept living, but everything felt more awake. The little things mattered more. The silences meant something. He learned to watch for the subtle, how time sometimes slows before a moment of meaning, how your breath can catch just before a truth arrives. His story wasn't about fear. It was about faith. Not the kind you read about, the kind you feel. Quiet, unshakable, like standing at the edge of something vast and knowing, somehow, you're not alone. Because Daniel was never alone that day. Something saw him, something warned him, and something loved him enough to whisper, "Not yet." He didn't need to prove it. He just needed to remember. And now, so do we. Because maybe this isn't just his story. Maybe it's yours too. Maybe you've felt that stillness, that invisible tug, that chill that doesn't come from the air, but from somewhere else, just before something changes. Maybe you've heard a voice and called it nothing, or maybe it was everything. So we ask you now, gently and sincerely, have you ever experienced a sign like this? Do you believe it was just coincidence, or something divine? What would you have done if this happened to you? Do you think angels are trying to guide us, even when we don't notice? Here at Saved by a Sign, we don't claim to have the answers. We simply open the space for the questions that matter most, for the sacred quiet where faith begins, for the stories that remind us we are seen and we are not alone. If this story touched your heart, don't let these signs go unnoticed. Subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us to hear more real stories of faith, mystery, and the moments when life whispers just in time. Thank you for staying until the end. But remember, there are stories that aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be felt. We'll see you in the next one, if you're still listening.